Panelists, comrades that have done an extensive research on the life and work of Malcolm X, but also Fidel Castro. To all those friends that are following this webinar via YouTube, thank you also for joining this conversation among friends. We are honored to call all of you friends. This event from the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the People is commemorating a milestone that transcends the relationship between the peoples of United States, Cuba, and the world. Fidel Castro and Malcolm X met 65 years ago in the Hotel Teresa in the core of Harlem. Celebrating this anniversary takes on an even deeper dimension as it coincides with the centennial of the birth of both figures this year and next year. Therefore, this dialogue is not only to remember, but it is a reaffirmation of the enduring relevance of their ideals in the current struggle, and a vindication of the friendship and internationalist solidarity that defines the essence of the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the People. 65 years ago, in September 1960, the history wove a moment of profound symbolism. The recent revolution, our triumph revolution, just was founded a few months before this meeting. Fidel was arriving to New York to attend the UN General Assembly. And what? Well, what we know, the rejection by the Manhattan's luxury hotels was an act of political hostility. And the response, as today, the response is more solidarity, a genuine solidarity between the people of the United States and the people of Cuba. By moving their headquarters to the Hotel Teresa in the heart of Harlem, it reflects how the strong ties of the African communities and the communities in Cuba were binding together. There, he found, of course, no rejection, but a warm refugee. And there he received a visit from a young leader, Malcolm X. Their encounter was not a coincidence. It was the convergence of two struggles that identify a common enemy: the imperialist system based on exploitation, white supremacy, and neocolonial domination. Malcolm X's welcoming phrase resonated today as a seal of legitimacy. As long as Uncle Sam is against you, you know you are a good man. That was the welcoming to Fidel. In that phrase, a mutual recognition was compiled. Fidel represented the anti-imperialist struggle of the global South, and Malcolm X embodied the fight for liberation and human rights in the heart of the empire. This meeting between Fidel and Malcolm occurred within the context of the unstoppable awakening of the liberation processes in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Cuba, under Fidel's leadership, did not just express solidarity with these struggles. It integrated itself into them, adopting internationalism as a non-negotiable principle. And it was in the very 1960, 65 years ago, in December, that the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the People was founded by the direct vision of Fidel. Its mission was and remains to be Cuba's bridge with the peoples of the world, to organize and channel solidarity, to denounce injustice and weave a network of hope and mutual support. The spirit of the meeting in Harlem is also the bricks of the foundation of the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the People, And that's why their legacy is embodied in our work today and forever. If we were to ask today, what has changed in the hostility of the imperialism? The answer we all know. They have changed some forms, but not the essence. The same system that harassed both Malcolm and Fidel maintains and intensifies the economic, commercial, and financial blockade against Cuba, an act of war intended to bring a sovereign people to their knees through hunger and need. It is the same system that decades later continues to brutally repress racial minorities on the very streets of the United States. It is the same system that today commits and endorses genocide in plain sight against the Palestinian people in Gaza, demonstrating that its contempt for human life knows no borders. We are witnessing a global resurgence of fascist and xenophobic ideologies, fueled by the very same centers of power. Faced with this panorama, the teachings of Fidel and Malcolm are more relevant than ever. Their legacy is a call for steadfast resistance, for unbreakable unity among all progressive forces, and for active solidarity as an ethical and political principle. These principles are not an abstraction. It has a concrete actions. 20 years ago, faithful to the legacy of both leaders in their solidarity and commitment with the poor countries and peoples of the world, Cuba created, a day like today, the Henry Reeve International Contingent of doctors specialized in disasters and serious epidemics. Its emergence has a direct root in the ethics of the Harlem Meeting. It was born in 2005 to offer aid to the people of the United States in the aftermath of the Hurricane Katrina, an outstretched hand that their government rejected out of political arrogance. Thus, the same spirit of solidarity that brought Fidel to Harlem in the 60s drove the creation of this contingent that has saved lives to millions of humble people. But the imperialism does not forgive our people, that does not forgive these solidarity values. It did not forgive Malcolm X's revolutionary clarity. It does not forgive the Cuban Revolution, and it does not forgive that Cuban doctors heal the humble, because this is an act of love and they only respond to hate. Today, remembering that encounter means taking also a side of the story. It means taking a side for the truth over slander, for hope over cynicism. We are fortunate to have privileged testimonies that will help us today to go deeper in the story, to go deeper in the legacy. Thanks to Ambassador Raul Roa Curí, thanks to Rosemary Mealy, thanks for the professors and researchers that are accompanying today. Let's all together make this anniversary not only a remembrance of memory, but a renewed spirit for action. Let us honor Fidel and Malcolm by multiplying solidarity, denouncing all the injustices, and working tirelessly, no matter the difficulties, for the better world that Fidel taught us. From ECAP, we remain committed to celebrate, to commemorate, but to multiply the legacy of both leaders. And we will be doing that not only with this webinar, but because of our own actions of work every day here in Cuba and in the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Leima, for your works. Of course, the Cuban Institute for Friendship with the People is and always will be proud about the friendship between U.S. people, but even more about this historic encounter between our leader, Fidel Castro Ruz, and Malcolm X. Now, I would like to pass the floor to our dear Rosemary Milley. Please, Rosemary.
Thank you so much. I'm so moved by your words, and thank you to the Cuban Friendship for the People, ECAP. Thank you so much. Because as we think about today, 65 years ago, once again, you are raising this meeting on the international scale. And I'm reminded of 1990, when ECAP and other organizations in Cuba called for a meeting that was really titled Malcolm X in the 90s. And it was at that time when scholars from around the world came, and scholars from Cuba came to welcome the delegation. And because what happened during that moment, once again, Cuba internationalized our struggles as African-American people, linking that struggle to the Cuban Revolution. And so today, once again, you are contributing to internationalizing our struggle with this international broadcast. And as members of the Cuban Solidarity Movement in this country, again, we want to thank you and the people of Cuba for raising up the names of Malcolm X, El Haj Malik El-Shabazz, and President Fidel Castro as we celebrate the centennial of their birth. Laima, you have basically framed this discussion in the historical context, and it only leaves for us to just add, because both of you have basically put into context the significance of this meeting today. And I can imagine, like the Hotel Teresa on September 19, 1960, when activists were organizing to welcome the Cuban delegation to Harlem at a moment when there was an attempt by this country, by this government, to silence this young revolution, because Fidel and the delegation arrived just on the heels of winning the struggle against Batista and such a horrible government that had oppressed the people for centuries, supported by the United States again, and how that delegation was shunned downtown. And the stories have been passed on about how when the delegation was shunned downtown, Fidel threatened to set up tents on the campus of the United Nations. And as we will hear from our comrade Corey, who was a young ambassador at the moment, because Cuba has always had links to the solidarity movement in the country, he reached out, and as we say, the rest is history. When Malcolm heard about this, along with other community-based organizations in Manhattan and Harlem in particular, that night of September 19th, the delegation arrived in Harlem. And today, we have something there now. There's an organization called, and people around the world should know about this, there's an organization called While We Are Still Here, which was founded by another activist, our sister Karen Taylor, to challenge some of the gentrification that's taking place in this city and around the country, where our histories and our stories are being washed away. And there's an attempt to silence us, to silence our history. But what While We Are Still Here has done, they have created markers throughout Harlem of where our people lived, struggled, and made contributions. And now at 125th Street, where Fidel and Malcolm met, there is a beautiful sign, a street marker that says, and it's a collective marker, it says, Josephine Baker, Fidel Castro slept here, and Malcolm X's office, the Organization of African American Unity, was here. So again, one single individual through community-based organizations and knowing the history and the significance of that meeting on September 19th, 1960, again, we have memorialized that meeting with this street marker that people are able to see. It's a beautiful marker. But let me get back to some of the things that you've said, because we have such illustrious guests with us today. I think the contribution that we can make is to continue to add on to this, the significance of this meeting, and contextualize it, as you've already said, in the context of the struggles that are going on globally against fascism, and how the global finance capital has now moved to this ultimate to really outrage fascism. And that is what we're struggling against. That is what we're faced against in this country. But we do have a history of what happened on September 19th and those 10 days in Harlem. It's been captured from that conference that I talked about that happened in 1990 in Havana. Out of that, we were challenged to create a text that we can pass on, that we can use. And that text is called Fidel and Malcolm X, Memories of a Meeting. And that book has been used in schools, and people are using it because they're firsthand accounts of the encounter. And also, again, thanks to Cuba, the book was also published in Spanish. But because of the US blockade against Cuba, the Spanish edition cannot be purchased here. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we're able to support Letras Cubanos, which published the Spanish text, that we need to have some kind of a movement to ensure that more copies of this book can be published in Cuba. But we found out that Memories of a Meeting is also being used during the centennial of Malcolm's birth in Spain by solidarity groups there. So the word globally is there, but these two books are critical and essential to knowing firsthand, what did the people think of this meeting? When Juan Almeida walked down the streets of Harlem and he was embraced by the people of Harlem, a young general. And then what did the people think when Fidel called for a dinner at the Hotel Teresa, when Eisenhower had shunned the Cuban delegation downtown? And then Fidel said, okay, then we'll have a dinner for all the workers in the hotel. And so the book has photographs of actually Fidel being overseeing a luncheon of hotel workers along with the owner of the hotel. And I raise up his name, Mr. Love Beef Goods. So I implore historians who are watching this telecast to continue searching and looking for this history. It's really important, because I was only able to do just a bit, and with the Cubans providing us with the photographs, and then there's another book called 10 Days in Harlem, another book about what happened. We need to continue this, and again, we need to put Laima's words into context and contextualize that meeting to actually what is going on now. It wasn't a photo op. It was not a photo op of two leaders. It was two men coming together, mutually understanding that the enemy was the same. And one of the things that Malcolm said, when they had this discussion, Fidel was saying, well, we're glad that here in Harlem, we're going to be meeting, etc. And Malcolm warned him that it was almost like that chicken come home to roost quote that we know from Malcolm, when Malcolm said to him, we know what they do. We've experienced it, and you are just beginning to experience how vicious they can be. And it was those kinds of exchanges that Fidel himself said were critical and important when we met Fidel in 1990 after the conference was held, when he gathered us, and in his own words, he shared with us the symbolism and how important it was that the two of them had met together. And of course, some people may be watching and wondering, well, did Malcolm ever go to Cuba as Fidel invited him? But unfortunately, Malcolm was assassinated because before he could accept the invitation. So today's gathering of us is a continuation of that symbolism. And I'm going to now pass over the, if I may, Aline, I don't know who you had coming up next, but I'm so happy to have Baba Zaid here, and also our sister Rabab, and I'll just take a side and watch now, and I'll come back on to fill in where I'm sure everyone else will just put an entire picture of the symbolism of this meeting together, politically, intellectually, and actively, which is critical and important.
Thank you. Please be my guest, and our dear guests have the floor.
Compañero Robab, you go.
Viva.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here. I'm always honored to be in the company and for the smell and the touch of Cuba, the free place for all the free people of the world who are fighting for their freedom. I'm very honored to be with my comrades and my sisters and brothers who are fighting here from Harlem, from the United States. And I want to always acknowledge that in the United States, we are always meeting, convening on hallowed grounds of the bodies of the people, indigenous people who have been martyred, of the African people who have been buried on grounds that we do not know. Who are they, where they are buried? And this is something that is for the history to be retrieving once we are liberated, because we can come across some of these facts, but not all of them, as long as there is imperialism and racism and fascism that is upsetting us. Secondly, this is very important anniversary, and anniversaries are very important in our project Teaching Palestine, Pedagogical Praxis, and the Indivisibility of Justice, which we were honored to have part of it in Cuba back in January of this year, and also during the delegation that Rosemary has organized in July 2024 and also in 2018 when we did Teaching Palestine in Cuba. It's really important to commemorate anniversaries, uh, partly because we really have to remember history, but also a key question that lies at the heart of social movement analysis and studies of anti-colonial resistance revolves around the ways in which forces come together, under what conditions they come together, why and how. Of particular importance are indigenous archives and oral histories, because some of these histories, if they are not written by those and remembered and passed along by those who are revolutionaries, who are critical of repression and colonialism and imperialism, will not be written the way that we want them to be written and will not be passed on to different generations. So in the Palestinian movement and in Palestinian studies and histories, it's very, very important to examine commemorations and think of them. And at this period, we are actually commemorating the Sabra and Shatila massacre of Palestinians in 1982 in Palestinian refugee camps in Beirut, after the United States made the commitment, and never the commitments are always empty, to protect Palestinian civilians if the Palestinian fighters leave Beirut. And once the Palestinian fighters left Beirut, the United States did not. And the Israeli Minister of War, Ariel Sharon, opened the floodlights to allow the killing of Palestinians between 800 and 3,000 civilians, to right-wing Lebanese to go and kill Palestinians, and Palestinian witnesses whom we interviewed. I was part of interviewing survivors of the massacre, said that they were also Israeli speaking Hebrew who were engaged in the killing. So we are commemorating the massacre also as part of learning what is going on today, the genocide of Palestinians by the Israeli strategic, actually, Zionist establishment to wipe away any existence of Palestinians so they would not live to tell the story of what has happened, the Zionist settler colonialism, and the resilience and the existence and the continuing existence of the Palestinian people. And in this sense, I also want to say that it is the role of Cuba historically and contemporarily has been incredible in extending solidarity to the Palestinians in every single manner, politically, at the United Nations, everywhere in the world, but also in material ways. Rosemary spoke about the doctors, and Laima spoke about the doctors, the brigade, and so on. But I also want to speak about the ways in which Fidel Castro, before he passed away, he actually gave 250 scholarships to Palestinians to study medicine, medical, to be studying, and also the President Diaz-Canel also added them. Now we have 500 scholarships for Palestinians to study, and there are many of them from Gaza who cannot actually go to their homes, but they are studying and learning, and many of them have graduated and have gone back. Some of them cannot go back to Gaza, but have gone back in many places and have specialized in much needed areas. And this is part of the material support that Cuba has, has an imposed blockade, which is denied the right to even be able to export vaccines, to export things that are other places are not even producing around the world, has been denied to do that, and has been really suffering from the repressive conditions of living. It has been so generous with sharing everything and setting the model and the example for other countries of the world to do so. And Palestinians are very inspired, as people who are fighting against colonial repression and Zionism are also taking an example of what's going on in Cuba, and the resilience and the steadfastness. And I personally, whenever I go to Cuba, I'm inspired. I get rejuvenated. I feel free in feeling breathing the free air of Cuba, and it's not a utopian. It's not sentimental. It's a very real and material issue, and this is something that has continued all the time. And I want to speak about the ways in which also Cubans have they visited. That, for example, Che Guevara and Raúl Castro visited Gaza. And visited Khan Yunis back in 1959, actually before the visit of Compañero Raúl to the United Nations. They have visited Gaza on their way from. It's not Raúl Castro is not mentioned a lot, so I've been able to dig this information. Malcolm X as well visited, actually twice visited Palestine in 1959 on his way to conduct a pilgrimage in Mecca. He stopped in Jerusalem, and this is a tradition that many Africans from African countries, pilgrims who went to Mecca, stopped in Jerusalem to do the second Hajj, and they were called the Maqdisiyin, Hajj Maqdisi, because Jerusalem was called it's called Beit al-Maqdis, to stop and do that. So Malcolm X, it's very interesting that he was carrying a tradition that many Africans, Muslims were carrying, and there is a lot of discussion about that. I gave a paper in Cuba when we were in the 2024 delegation about the Muslim Palestinians from African roots. Anyway, so this, and then he went again to Khan Yunis in 1964. And it's very interesting because Khan Yunis is the refugee camp that has been bombed by the Israelis during the trilateral aggression by Egypt, by Israel, Britain, and France after the 1956. During the 1956 aggression, Cuba had not yet become a free country, because the Cuban Revolution was in 1959, which one. But at this time, they bombed, they killed Palestinians in the Kufr Qasim, which was it's a Palestinian village under Israeli control. It's supposed to be Israeli citizens. But they were killed because Israel was afraid of Palestinians rising up and against Israeli aggression. And in Gaza, about 2,000 people, according to UN and other sources, were killed also in this process. They visited Khan Yunis and they met with people. So between the two heroes we're talking about, they were actually back in Gaza and they visited and met with people in Gaza. And there are so many photos. So we're talking about ways in which we're not talking about empty solidarity. we're talking about people coming together. I think it's also like after Malcolm also visited, went to Egypt back and published his very important thesis, I would say, called the Zionist Logic, in which he actually talked about, he says the number one weapon of the 20th century imperialism is Zionist dollarism. So he talked about Zionism as an ideology of racism, and talked about the material emphasis on it. The other thing that I think is very, very important about this is the fact that they met at the Hotel Teresa, as you were saying, Companiera. It was not an accident. None of this accident. It is not an accident that the place that Fidel Castro went was Cuba. I'm not going to be staying at a hotel that is disrespecting the Cuban delegation. And even the fact that the hotel were saying, we're going to charge you $20,000 for fear of destroying such a racist, such an imperialist, such a white supremacist statement to say so. I mean, anticipating, and this is always applying to all our people, anticipating guilt before even proven innocent. Well, everywhere else it's applied differently. And this is such an insult. So we're not going to be staying with you. We're going to storm out, and went to Hotel Teresa, which was also very significant because we're talking about the conditions in Harlem, about the conditions of the collapsed building, about the conditions that were so devastated because of the rise of and the devastation of imperialism and capitalism in the United States. That continues. That, I mean, this is something that we're going to go and express solidarity and receive solidarity from our people. We are going to be among our people who are going to have our backs. We're going to be in a safe environment. So this in itself, none of it was accidental. Going to Harlem was not accidental. Being in Hotel Teresa was not accidental. Receiving support from Malcolm X and the African American community was not accidental. The US placing sanctions, and I want to speak about that, but before that, I want to say it wasn't just Fidel Castro who was there. The Fidel Castro and the Cuban delegation, Jamal Abdel Nasser, the Egyptian president, went together with Fidel Castro and the Cuban delegation in solidarity to Hotel Teresa. They weren't kicked out of their hotel, but they insisted, and it's very, very significant because Jamal Abdel Nasser was one of the founders of the Bandung non-aligned movement. He had been subjected, and Egypt had been subjected to sanctions, to the trilateral aggression, and also to the Eisenhower doctrine, under which Cuba was attacked by Eisenhower and subjected to sanctions because of the nationalization of sugar industries, the nationalization of things that belong to the people by the Cuban government. The same thing with the Nasser, nationalization of the Suez Canal, building the Aswan Dam, being very strong in the anti-colonial and anti-Zionist organizing, building, supporting a Palestinian army, and so on and so forth. So the Eisen were attacking them, as well as attacking, but also at the Bandung non-aligned conference of all basically Afro-Asia. There were nobody from Latin America at that time. And actually when Cuba was liberated, that's when Cuba joined. And the first conference after that in 1964, 66, was going to be in Algeria, but it had to be moved to Cuba because Mahdi bin Baraka, the Moroccan leader, was kidnapped by the French intelligence, by the Moroccan intelligence, and was dissolved in acid. So he was supposed to be the chair of the Tricontinental Conference, after which OSPAL was founded. And then it was held in Havana, Cuba. And before OSPAL, if you go there, you will see there was a statue for Mahdi bin Baraka. So Cuba actually continued the tradition of the non-aligned movement, while Cuba in 1955 was under Batista. So there is this collaboration between Nasser, between Cuba, and they continue to be very supportive, bringing the spirit of Afro-Asia, Africa, Asia, and Latin America together. Third worldism, along with people in the United States, the African American community that thought of itself as part, when they say African Organization of African Unity, connecting with the third world and refusing the imposition by the US government of either the Eisenhower that actually represses people, and now continuing the Trump administration is doing it also to the Palestinian delegation, again, refusing them visas to go. The same thing they do to the Cuban. You can only go 20 kilometers around the United Nations. I mean, all of these fascistic containment things, but they also tried to contain people within the United States and say, you have no business dealing with things outside of colonial borders of the United States, a settler colonial regime. But also, you cannot deal with anything else. And people like Malcolm X and other leaders in the world that knew where are we going to have connections with whom we have solidarity, who are we going to connect. We are not going to listen to the ways you're trying to contain us. It's not enough that you have already attempted to genocide indigenous people. It's not enough that you kidnapped and enslaved us. It's not enough that you're continuing to imprison and assassinate our leader. It's not enough. You're even trying to stop us from connecting with our sisters and brothers in other parts of the world who think about anti-colonial liberation, and we are also for anti-colonial liberation. So I think in this sense, it's very, very important. So the last point I will just mention is that this is the whole sense of connection and solidarity. It's very, very important to say no at that time, no to the U.S. exercise of power at that time, and no to the exercise of power in today. And as Cuba stands and says no, and as we celebrate the centennials of Malcolm X, of Fidel Castro, we also celebrate Franz Fanon. We also celebrate Patrice Lumumba, who was assassinated by the CIA and by forces with him. We also celebrate the centennial of George Habash, one of the Palestinian leaders who is not talked about a lot today because people are very afraid to speak about Palestine in the United States because of the aggressive things that are going on. As we celebrate and we think about what is going on, what is happening in the world today, as people come together and express solidarity, even though the genocide is going on, Cuba stands up and stands out in the world as leading the support, as being part of the International Court of Justice, as being part of the boycott, as speaking up very loudly. People here in the US, in the Black community, in Harlem, the site, the castle of resistance, the castle of boycott, the march against all assassinations, all repression, and so on, is moving towards that. People of the world are standing up and saying, no, no more. We're not going to allow the genocide to continue. We're not going to allow the blockade to continue. We're not going to allow any of these repressions to continue, because when people have stood, and I was listening to speeches of Cuba before, Patria Libre o Morir, which is exactly what the Palestinians are saying today. The land is free or dead. And people are saying, we're not going to bow down. This is what the Algerians said. This is what everybody will say. We stand, we fight, we resist. It's imposed upon us. We have no choice but to keep fighting, to stand, and to be in solidarity with each other. And thank you so much for having me in this important panel.
Thank you, Professor Rabab, for sharing this idea with us and with all that joined this live broadcast today. Please now I pass the floor to Professor Saeed Muhammad. Please, Professor.
First, I do not know how I can adequately come behind these two amazing compañeras. I have to say, I am not a professor. I am more of a foot soldier. I'm the kind of lieutenant. If we were marching in the streets of America, I would be assigned to protect Rosemary and her Rabab. That's what I do. And I'm proud to live in my lane. But let me first say thank you to ECAP. Most of my time in Cuba over the years has been spent as a guest of ECAP, right? From Cayamitu to all over the places that ECAP has shown us over the years in their timely and most genuine and generous expression of welcoming solidarity to those of us trying to learn this wonderful thing that we dare to call and embrace called socialism. I want to thank my big sister, Rosemary Mealy. I represent the generation that is the children of Malcolm and Fidel, right? I was born during that period, literally just months away from when that epic meeting took place. I am one of those young men who survived the madness of America's streets, only to find my way from that by virtue of embracing Malcolm's legacy as an lumpen bad person who stole the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was trafficking drugs. Terrible. But Malcolm helped us liberate ourselves from the depth of what of oppression can look like in America's streets, right? So that's the space that I come from. I see myself as an inheritor of an incredible generation's legacy. And I say this, and I come in the spirit of gratitude to wind this conversation down and to give it some balance and some breath, is that it's no accident of history that this epic moment took place at the dawn of the 1960s, one of the most pivotal decades of the entire century that was the epic 20th century. No accident of history that these two great revolutionaries would come together and to unapologetically embrace each other's struggle. No accident of history. No accident of history that just the year before, and I'm glad Rabab lifted up 1959, Malcolm's trip abroad, when he went to East Jerusalem first, because many forget that. Malcolm's revolutionary expression did not begin in 1964 when he left his main organization. He always had that with him. It was his organization that struggled with it. He was very clear and very intentional, right? We should appreciate also that, you know, the day that he was born and how loaded ancestrally that day is. May 19th is also the anniversary of the day we lose the great Jose Marti. May 19th is the anniversary of the birth of Ho Chi Minh. Right? May 19th, we lose our dean of Pan-Africanism, the Pan-Africanist that from Harlem who taught us after Malcolm left, the great Alombe Brath, left us on May 19th, right? So we need to appreciate those numbers. Ancestral math is indeed profound. And in the spirit of gratitude, Cuba in its selflessness, Cuba in its courage, but what Cuba always tells us in the midst of all the challenges of its bravery, its courage, and its selflessness, that it is always solidarity is a matter of principle. And we salute wholeheartedly and unapologetically how steadfast Cuba has set such a principled example of solidarity with each of our struggles. And here at this time, and we are looking at two monsters of settler colonialism, the most violent expressions of colonialism, Israel and the United States, hand in hand with ethnic cleansing. It is absolutely horrible. And it is no accident that our respective struggles represent the foundation of resistance and solidarity that is ultimately going to ensure the full embarrassment and isolation of these two forces as the world continues to see how wrong and genocidal this moment is, and how right solidarity, socialism, and solidarity is and always has been. They are the ones that are desperate in their fascism. They are the ones that are desperate in their ethnic cleansing. They are the ones that are isolated, and the clock of time and destiny is ticking steadfastly against them. It is up to us to hold the line, to be steadfast, as Cuba has shown us how to be steadfast with our solidarity, and to be resilient in our resistance, and to continue to see in our resilience and our resistance what a liberated future looks like. Cuba has shown us what socialism looks like in a real, material, practical way. Shown us how it works and how it is the answer to the question. And so we have to look forward to a world where the rest of the world can see and embrace that too, even from the madness of the confines of the monster that is the United States imperialism. It's not, we recognize that this is they are dangerous in their desperation. Their ships are marauding the Caribbean Sea, threatening our sister Venezuela, right? And we stand in full solidarity with Venezuela and their right to self-determination and respect for their national sovereignty. And we appreciate their experimentation with democracy and socialism. And so we say we are grateful. Rosemary and I are about to have a project that we're working on together where we're going to be recruiting young people for ELAM, right? And it's just incredible to think about. For all of the pressures that Cuba faces, Cuba still wants to fulfill and give of itself in that incredible space, when others of a different orientation would probably do just the opposite, right? But Carlotta's Cubs are coming. They're coming, right? And they're coming with great intention and hopefully with a shared vision that we're talking about. And they will be a part of the fruit of all of our labor, all of our sacrifices, and all of our courageous solidarity at a moment that requires us to be courageous with our solidarity. So, and then ultimately also, let me say this, right? We have a saying in the Harlems of America: when Africa called, Cuba answered. And the ultimate answer for us as African people was Operation Carlotta, where Cuba put their whole revolution on the line. Great risk, but did it as a matter of principle. As a matter of principle. And that marked the beginning of the end of one apartheid. And we hope the international solidarity in all of its varieties will end the apartheid that is now facing our people in Gaza. So solidarity is the watchword for this time, and gratitude is the offering I hope to bring for all of us, for the great example, the great selflessness, the great generosity, the great welcoming, the great courage, and the undying commitment to solidarity as a matter of principle. That is the Cuban people and the Cuban Revolution. Just say thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the years, all you have given, all you have dedicated, and all you have been and continue to be. And in the language of our streets in America, we got your back. X's and Malcolm is the answer.
Professor Said Muhammad, thank you so much to our dear guests. We, the present generation here in Cuba, have a great commitment in following not only the ideas, but the behavior of these two great leaders that were Malcolm X and Fidel Castro. Thank you so much for your words. As we announced at the beginning, following, we will listen to special remarks of Ambassador Raúl Roa Curí. With a broad diplomatic record, Ambassador Roa was one of the diplomats who was in New York with the Cuban delegation led by our Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro Ruz in September of 1960. His testimony is included in the book Fidel and Malcolm X, Memories of a Meeting.
The meeting between Fidel Castro and Malcolm X in the Theresa Hotel in Harlem was of great significance, of great political significance, both to the relations of Cubans and Americans, but also, I would say, internationally. Malcolm X was already a leader of the black people in the United States, and although he was, at the time, his political scope was still a little narrow in the sense that it was the Muslim movement, etc. Later on, it became a wider political movement, comprehending also non-blacks and non-Muslims in the struggle for social liberation in the United States. And Malcolm understood very well that this had to be a struggle of all the people, because it wasn't the struggle of only the black people in the United States. It was the struggle of all the people who were working class, who were poor, who were discriminated for any reason, race, color, religion, whatever. And he became a symbol of the struggle, of this real struggle in the States. And this interview with Fidel at the Hotel Teresa covered many of these aspects. They spoke about these things. They spoke about the struggle in Cuba and how Cuba was fighting discrimination, how we were doing, we were actually enacting laws forbidding all types of discrimination in our country. And this was a struggle because, of course, this is not just a problem of laws, it's a problem of also of culture. And we had inherited this culture of discriminating against non-whites, quote unquote, because when you say, okay, we're people of Spanish descent in Cuba, well, people of Spanish descent in Cuba have also origins in Africa, have also origins in the Arab countries. So there is no such a thing as white. It's just human beings of one type or the other, but human beings. This is something which is not yet fully understood worldwide. It is something which the progressive people understand very well, and this is something which they fight for. But this was something which was not, at the time, something which was generally shared by all the society. There was a lot of discrimination in the US, and there was a lot of discrimination in old Cuba, and this started to change with the revolution. And it's still changing, and it still has to change in Cuba. It doesn't mean that there is no discrimination in Cuba. There is still discrimination in Cuba. But we fight against it, and we have lost against it. And that is a big change, because before there were no laws against it, and nobody was fighting against it, or very few were fighting against it. So I think that the significance of the meeting between Fidel and Malcolm at the time was this. It was the meeting of two leaders who were fighting for the same cause. And it is important not only for Cuba and the United States, but for all the rest of the Latin America and the world at large. It is important to say that when Malcolm X came to see Fidel, he already knew, of course, who Fidel was. And that is precisely why he had proposed the Cuban delegation through Bob Tabor, who was then one of the leaders of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. He had offered this hotel in Harlem, the Teresa Hotel, and because he knew what Fidel thought, he knew of his liberating wishes and struggle, and he shared this struggle and he shared these principles. So he wanted very much to meet Fidel and to make a statement, a political statement of his visit to Harlem, in order to say, yes, we stand for these principles against discrimination and against racism, against apartheid in South Africa, and so on. I think that Fidel also, of course, knew about Malcolm X. We had heard, and we knew, we had contacts, as a matter of fact, through the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, we had contacts with the black Muslims and other organizations also who were fighting against racial discrimination and so on. And I believe that this meeting had not only the importance it had at that particular time, but that all over the years, this coincidence, this meeting of minds between Fidel and Malcolm X has had an influence in Cuban-US relations, especially in Cuban-American, Black American relations. And I think it is still valid today because Malcolm's thought, political thought, is still valid in the United States. The struggle is still there. And the struggle is still here too, in the sense that we still have discrimination to get rid of. but it's certainly very, very present in Latin America and many other countries in Europe and so on, where now there is a revival of fascism and of not only racial discrimination, but all sorts of political discrimination and so on. And this is, I think, basically the idea of Fidel and Malcolm was that, against all kinds of discrimination, political, racial, whatever, and for the true freedom of the individual and of the people. If you ask me what would I say to the young people in Cuba and the United States today, is that the ideas expressed by Fidel and Malcolm X in their own speeches in the US and in Cuba are still valid. Not only valid, but they're very valid. And we must, they are a banner of struggle. And we must use them today to fight for equality, for social equality, for economic equality, for racial equality. I think they are very much valid, and that is the importance, I would say, to the young people today to fight for these ideas.
It is so amazing. It is simply amazing to hear the story told by the people who live it. Thank you so much to Ambassador Roa for these amazing remarks that shared with us today. Rosemary, Rabat, Professor Said, did you hear me? Yes. Do you want to say something? Do you want to add some idea?
Well, unfortunately, we could not get the transmission of Compañero Raúl, but for those who spoke Spanish, they could read it. Well, hopefully that could be resolved with the YouTube. But I know the technology, trying to coordinate it's difficult. But I just want to say that, you know, we're living in a moment now where we would have to reflect on Malcolm and Fidel, because they talk so much about the militarization of what imperialism does. And we would be remiss if we did not mention, Zaid mentioned what was happening in Venezuela, but I just like to mention the militarization of Puerto Rico, for example, the incursions there, the use of countries in the Caribbean as points for invasions, the challenging that our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean have right now with the international medical brigades, and the bullying of the United States, telling sovereign nations in the Caribbean that they should halt these life-saving provisions that Cuban doctors are providing through the International Medical Brigade, and threatening them that if they do not adhere to that, then their visas will be denied. So Malcolm and Fidel projected that. They knew that. And, you know, even in 2014, Fidel talked about the whole question. He mentioned, and people need to read this, he talked about this new and repulsive kind of fascism that was resurfing amongst the humanity. He was speaking primarily about he called it the Palestinian Holocaust in Gaza. And as you mentioned before, Rabab mentioned the fact that that Malcolm had gone to Gaza. So we have to be on alert at this moment, because those two leaders provided us with almost like a map for how to approach this period, domestically as well as internationally. And fundamental to that is the necessity for solidarity to transcend these borders, the horrible things that's happening to our brothers and sisters who are being denied the right to live here, they're being forced to quote unquote, dissolve them in a sense by moving them out of this country under the guise of that somehow that this country is under attack, because we have brothers and sisters from Asia, Africa, and Latin America living here who've helped to build this country the same way in which we as Africans did, and how the necessity right now is to kill people, to just it's just the height of inhumanity. And Malcolm and Fidel talked about the necessity of embracing humanity. And that is our call on this 65th anniversary, to transcend borders, to strengthen our solidarity, to teach our history to our children, and to not to resist, and to not in any way allow them to force us into silence. And I would just want to close with that, because I think that's critical. And we'll see you in Cuba for the conference to celebrate ECAP's anniversary. And we're going to bring people, and we're going to use the little laws that we still have to travel. And so we'll see you in December. And Bob has to get back to class, so I think maybe she may want to share something in closing.
Rabat, Said, any comment?
I'll just say that this year is also the centennial of Robert Williams. During the same season that we're talking about, 1959, 1960, a young Black civil rights leader by the name of Robert Williams dared to arm and defend his community in Monroe, North Carolina, against Klan terrorism, homegrown American terrorism. And he was denounced and isolated by bourgeois forces here in the United States. It was Malcolm who came to his aid and his defense, and made the question of armed self-defense a morally legitimate question in our dialogue, again, at the top of that great decade. And I do not want us to underappreciate gatherings and meetings and sharings like these, because Robert Williams would leave the United States for Cuba. And in Cuba, he would do something called Radio Free Dixie to counter America's propaganda war against Cuba. And we need to see ourselves as champions of the propaganda for the people of the world that it needs at this time, through mediums like these that the other side cannot control, cannot distort, and cannot shut down. So I appreciate again your convening this gathering. We appreciate it for its love and its strategic value. And we will share it and sound the drum all over the Americas.
Professor Rabat? Professor Rabat, do you hear me? Okay.
I think she's happy to hear.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you to our dear guest. Do you hear me well, please?
I'm going to just say a few things.
Okay.
Yeah, to just first of all, thank you again for having this opportunity, because this is, oh, can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. So first of all, really appreciate you, because this is, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
Yes, Rabbi, we hear you. We hear you. You're good. She's having trouble hearing us, but she was good.
Okay. Now, can I say something now? Okay. No, it keeps repeating. Okay. I'm just saying this is really amazing, because it will be a great video to show to my students. Will be really amazing to just teach them about this, because I have Rosemary's book on my syllabus, but now they can read it.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes. And it keeps. Okay. Here, how is this?
Fine. Good. You want your fire, Bob? She can't hear us.
let us do an invitation to your students and
It
to
can't,
the
I'm
many
are you
students.
hearing the same thing being repeated again and again?
No.
No.
No?
We hear you
Okay, I'm going to
perfectly.
ignore my voice and I'm going to say, okay, it's excellent because it's very useful. It's useful to commemorate. It's useful to bring, I mean, what you were saying, Brother Zayed, about Robert F. Williams, this book, Negroes with Guns, he was also a mentor for the Black Panther Party. There is so much history that we can teach, all of the histories that, I mean, the whole visits from Che and Raul to Gaza, Malcolm X to Gaza, the speeches of Fidel, all of these things that have happened for us, for Palestinians, it's really important to raise all of these issues. Also, the question of weapons. How much United States sends weapons to Israel? And this is also because of the money weapons industries make. Part of the Eisenhower doctrine was also supporting the Bay of Pigs. I mean, this is something that people also forget about that. And, you know, I was one of the people who visited and saw the atrocities. I think all of these things can teach more and more as we see what's going on today, to remember what's going on yesterday, and not because some people like to leave it in the past and say this has happened before and it's not happening today. It's happening today, and we show the consequences for the younger generation, that there is intentionality to make them forget. So people know what is going on and understand the dangers and be determined to learn, because we have to learn before we act, to express solidarity, to come together, to prevent weapons everywhere, because nobody needs weapons. We need food, we need medicine, we need clean air, we need to come together. We need to express humanity and solidarity with each other. And we demand justice for everyone. So thank you, Cuba, again.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone that joined us together to pay tribute to this magnificent encounter between Fidel and Malcolm X. In this way, we are closing our virtual conference. But at the present times, where the resurgence of fascism threatens daily, the new generation have the commitment and duty to fight tireless for a better world. That better world means ending genocide in Palestine, stopping all wars, eliminating racism, violence, defending the self-determination and sovereignty of our peoples. That would be the best tribute to Fidel and Malcolm X. Viva Fidel,
Que viva.
viva Malcolm,
Que viva.
hasta la victoria
Que viva.
siempre. Thank you so much.
Sabemos.
Thank you. Ciao. Love you all.
Love you too, man. Love all of you. Beautiful, beautiful.